Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea McDonald, the Clean Water Defense Campaign Manager for Waterkeeper Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to welcome you to Fidra's webinar on rail spills and plastic pellet pollution, a topic that's impacting ecosystems around the world. For our agenda, we'll hear from several speakers covering plastic pellet pollution and acute rail sources, investigating rail sources of plastic pellet pollution in Texas, and documenting rail sources of pellet pollution and making an impact. We'll then again have that Q&A at the end. For our speakers taking us through these topics today, we will hear from Jamie Clarkson from Fidra. He's a project officer at the Scotland-based environmental charity Fidra and works as a part of the Great Nurdle Hunt team. Fidra's citizen science project works to document evidence of global nurdle pollution and call for change for preventing nurdle pollution. We'll also hear from Jace Tunnel from Nurdle Patrol. Jace is the Director of Community Engagement at the Heart Research Institute at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. He's the founder of Nurdle Patrol, my personal favorite website, a citizen science project that tracks pellet pollution worldwide to raise awareness and inform policy. Jace also directs and produces Beachcombing, a video series that highlights unusual items washing up on the Gulf Coast beaches and the stories they tell about marine life and ocean processes. We'll also hear from Claire Swithenbank Bowman from Trash for Tokens. Claire is an award-winning environmental entrepreneur, ocean advocate, and the founder and executive director of Trash for Tokens in the United States and Litter for Tokens in South Africa, and the inventor of the mermaid tear catcher. Her work has a strong focus on plastic pellet pollution and upstream accountability following a large-scale nurdle spill along the South African coastline. She has been present She has presented her findings to international bodies advocating for regulatory reform and safer transport practices. Now based in California, Claire is focused on documenting and raising awareness of pellet pollution from rail transportation corridors, including impacts of protected wetlands, waterways, and coastal ecosystems. I will now turn it over to Jamie to give us an overview.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you for the great introduction. As Chelsea said, my name is Jamie Clarkson. I'm a project officer here at Fidra, and I work on our Great Nurdle Hunt project, which is our citizens science project, which looks at the issue of nurdle pollution. So, first of all, for those of you who are unfamiliar with plastic pellets, or nurdles as you might also hear them called, plastic pellets are microplastics. They are small plastic pellets about 5 millimeters in diameter, or about the size of a lentil, and they're the industrial feedstock that's used to make almost all plastic products. They can be made from virgin plastics, recycled plastics, or bioplastics, and they're a major source of upstream plastic pollution and the second largest primary microplastic pollution source. The thing that makes nurdle pollution different to a lot of other sorts of sources of plastic pollution is that this is an industrial source of microplastic pollution. This is occurring at the start of the plastic life cycle. And as you can see from this map here, nurdle pollution has been documented around the world, from Canada to Kenya, from France to Fiji, and at all points in between. So nowhere is safe from nurdle pollution. So what are the impacts of nurdle pollution? Once nurdle pollution into the environment, it is extremely difficult to remove and is highly mobile. Animals can easily mistake plastic pellets for food. They look quite a lot like fish eggs, for example. This can lead to starvation and organ damage, and also introducing harmful microplastics and chemicals into the food chain. Plastic pellets in the environment over time will also leach harmful chemicals inside them out into the environment, while harmful chemicals already in the environment and pathogens can adsorb onto the surface of the nurdles, and this creates a harmful chemical cocktail on the surface, which is harmful again to wildlife and can enter into the food chain. Nurdle pollution has been identified in protected areas around the world, from the Galapagos Islands to Mexico to the UK to India and beyond, with nurdle pollution found in 23 of 36 globally internationally recognized biodiversity hotspots. Nurdle pollution can also impact local communities and economies. For example, we've seen from major spills how this can impact fish communities who aren't able to fish and due to the impact of the fish stocks and safety concerns following nurdle spills. So it's really, nurdle pollution really is a multi-layered issue. So where does pellet pollution come from? Pellet pollution occurs when pellets spill into the environment throughout the global plastics supply chain. This occurs during production, during transportation by land and sea, during the conversion of plastic pellets into products, during recycling of plastics, and handling at all points in between. And this loss is the result of poor handling and mismanagement of plastic pellets throughout the supply chain. This results in an estimated 445,000 tons of plastic pellets entering the environment each year globally. Due to the extensive global supply chains as well, this means that these supply chains cover the entire globe. So, like I said, nowhere is safe from pellet pollution. So we're going to now focus in a little bit on rail networks as a source of pellet pollution. So rail networks represent an important but often overlooked source of land-based pellet pollution. Rail networks are frequently used to transport large volumes of pellets, particularly in North America. Pellet loss can occur at many points throughout a rail network. For example, derailments present a major risk of acute loss occurring, where the derailment results in one of the cars coming off the rails and spilling a large amount of nurdles into the environment at once, for example. There is also chronic loss of nurdles occurring throughout the rail network as well. For example, that can occur, for example, during the loading and unloading of the cars, during transportation, during the return of the empty cars, or cleaning, for example. And this can result in nurdle pollution occurring over a large area, as rail networks can often be very large, traveling across a large area, which means that there's a potential for that nurdle loss to occur throughout the rail network. Rail lines will also often travel quite close to water bodies, rivers, for example, which means that loss can quickly enter into a water system. This derailment image here you can see is it occurred right next to a water system. So it really highlights how this can easily impact into water systems, which can then carry the nurdles over a larger area. So what we decided to do was we're going to focus now on the USA as a bit of a case study. So why is the USA being identified as particularly at risk of pellet pollution from rail sources? The USA is home to a large plastics industry, as you can see from this map, and is also a major producer and exporter of primary plastic products, which includes plastic pellets. Each year, millions of tons of plastics are transported around the USA through the rail freight network, with the rail freight network covering over 140,000 miles, with many of these lines connecting directly to industry sites. Derailments are also a fairly frequent occurrence within the USA, meaning that there's a high risk of acute pellet loss occurring due to these derailments. There's also an issue of limited reporting of pellet spills in the USA when they do occur on the rail networks. And there is also a lack of effective regulation to prevent pellet loss and ensure the cleanup in the event of a spill. And this map here just illustrates how extensive the US freight rail network is. It really is a web across the whole country. So between 1990 and 2024, there has been 58,000 derailments across the USA. The issue of a lack of reporting means that when a pellet spill occurs, it's not always reported due to derailment. And this means that it can be very difficult to determine how many of these derailments are resulting in pellet loss and how much pellet loss is occurring from derailment incidents. However, NGOs have estimated that 148 derailments have involved plastic pellets between 2010 and 2021, though this is likely an underestimate of the true number. But this goes to show how frequency of derailments and a large amounts of plastics traveling through the network means that there's a high risk of these incidents occurring. Some of these incidents include East Palestine, Ohio, which occurred in 2023, which some of you might remember from the news from a couple of years ago. And then also Springfield, Ohio, which was another spill that happened within a month of the East Palestine one. We also saw derailments, for example, in Harmarville, Pennsylvania, and in Valley Falls, New York, which resulted in the derailment spilling pellets into water systems directly. So, what are some of the solutions to preventing pellet loss from the supply chain and from rail sources? Firstly, pellet pollution is preventable. It's estimated that 95% of pellet pollution can be prevented through mandatory best practice measures implemented throughout the global plastic pellet supply chain. To effectively prevent nodal pollution from both derailment and ongoing product loss across the rail network, a legislated supply chain approach is essential. This should mandate standardized pellet handling best practice across the supply chain, require independent third-party audits to monitor compliance with this, and also ensuring full accountability and timely cleanup in the event of a spill following derailments or from ongoing losses from rail transport and rail networks. So that is a quick overview of the sources of pellet pollution in rail networks. But today we have just launched our new case study report, which is a new case study report called Plastic Pellet Pollution from Rail Sources. And this report highlights the risks of pellet pollution from rail sources and focuses on the USA as a case study. However, many of the findings in this report are also applicable to other nations and regions where freight rail networks transport pellets also. So wherever you are, even if you're not in the USA, there's still useful information in there for you. And you can find more information on pellet pollution from rail sources in this report available on our Nurdle information hub there. And I also put the link in the chat once I'm finished. And I encourage you to download the full report and please get in touch if you have any questions. And with that, I will hand back to Chelsea.
Thank you, thank you, Jamie. And now I will turn it over to Jace to talk about his work specifically in Texas.
Let's see, I think you have to take that stop sharing so that I could share.
Oh, yes, no problem. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. Well, thanks for having me today to talk about. I'm gonna try to focus on, and nobody ever talks about the rail issue, and so I'm glad that we're having this webinar because it's a chance to be able to get the word out about the issues along rail systems and plastic pellets. And because rail systems, railroads are privately owned, it adds another layer of regulatory issues and how to solve it. So I'm just going to go through and I'll tell you how we do surveys along railroads. And I always tell people right off the bat, don't do surveys along railroads. Although you're going to see that we've had about 168 surveys done along railroads. I always tell people not to do it because it's dangerous. And in most cases, it's illegal because they are private. The rails are privately owned. And so, but there is a way to be able to sample along railroads where you're away from the railroad. And so I'll kind of go through a little bit of that. But our methodology is basically the same for doing a Nurdle survey along a beach, along a river, or along a lake. You go out for 10 minutes and you look for nurdles. And if you find nurdles, you put how many you found. And if you don't find nurdles, you put how many you found, which is 0. You put that into nurdlepatrol.org and then it shows up on a map. And you can use your hand only. That's part of the methodology is you can't use any tools. So it's by hand only. That way we can compare one site to another site, all over the world. And so if you go to nurdlepatrol.org and you put your data into the reporting form, it shows up on this map. And you can click on a dot and it'll tell you when the sample was taken and all that. Well, you'll notice this is the United States here and Mexico and Central America. If you look at this, you'll see a lot of these colored dots that are inland. And so they could be rivers, they could be lakes, but they could also be railroads. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And I'm going to really focus on Texas. And so if you look where Texas is, it's labeled down here. You see Gulf of Mexico, and then you see where a lot of purples are. The purple color is over 1,001 nurdles in 10 minutes that was collected by hand only. And so if you zoom into that Texas, that's what I'm going to do next. Kind of get a closer look, because this really gives you kind of a perspective of this isn't just a coastal issue. You know, we're not just finding nurdles that are washing up at the beach. They're actually being found inland. And some of these, it's because, you know, Jamie showed you the image there that had nurdle production facilities, you know, all up inside of the United States. And so that's what some of these are found out. So the nurdle survey has been done outside the fence line. They've been downstream in a creek or in a lake. But a lot of these are along railroads. And so I'm going to put up a map here of where railroads are in Texas. And you can see there is quite a web. Some of these orange ones are old ones. And then the blue are inactive, and then green are active. And so what I'm going to do, now I'm going to show you the data that's been collected on railroads only. Well, okay, wait, let me show you this first. And then I'm going to get in and show you that railroad map again with the data for railroads only. But this is kind of a zoomed in location along the coast in central Texas, on the central coastal Texas. But you can see these inland, almost like a straight line going down. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's kind of going down. And you see a place called Kingsville. That is along a railroad. Of course, this is roads, but a lot of the railroads go along highways, at least here in Texas. And so you can see that there's been quite a few rail surveys done. And the main thing here is these aren't sites where there's a manufacturer, you know, producing nurdles. This is going in between a manufacturing facility and a client that is purchasing the nurdles off the rail. And so these are being lost all along during transportation. That's an important distinction there, because there are some of these high numbers that have actually been found along a railroad that are right at the facility. So where they're onloading and offloading all the time. But a lot of these, they're being lost during transportation. And so if you look at Texas, now this is the whole kind of southeast region of the United States. These are all railroad surveys that have been done. But what I want to show you next is I'm going to overlay the railroads in Texas so that you can see kind of how these match up. And so you can see here, you know, where there aren't railroads. Of course, there's, as you'd expect, there's none being sampled, but some are like really far out. And the thing about Texas is once you get out to West Texas, it's like a desert. There's hardly any trees or anything. It's like rocks, and it's really dry. And to be able to find nurdles out here is interesting, because you know, I always associate the nurdles that we find with lakes, rivers, or the ocean, but to be able to find them out in the desert is interesting. But this just kind of shows the problem that we have. Okay, so some of the stats from Nurdle Patrol, looking at the data, there's been 168 surveys done at 101 sites across the United States. These have only, what's in Nurdle Patrol, the data that's been collected has only been in the United States, where people have looked along railroads. You know, at Nurdle Patrol, I don't know, there's 32 to 35 countries that have submitted data into the database, but for railroads, only, you know, US states and 14 different states have submitted. 72 of those are in Texas. 47 nurdles in 10 minutes is the average. And then those range across, you know, some have 0 nurdles, and there's been one that had 623 nurdles, and that's in 10 minutes. And so the 623, that's a lot of nurdles to find in 10 minutes along a railroad. You know, that could have been a possible spill or something like that. But only 10 sites had 0 nurdles out of the 101 sites. So about 10% had 0 nurdles that have been sampled. And one thing I have here is, you'll notice, this is what I wanted to mention, is like, notice that the guys that are collecting data here, they're not on the railroad. They're about 15 to 20 feet off the railroad. And they're looking in a bare area. And that's where water would pond up. It's a safer way to look because railroads, the trains are very fast, and so you don't want to be on them or near them. The other thing is that they're on an ant mound. We have something called harvester ants in the southern part of the United States, and they actually collect rocks to prevent vegetation from growing up. And the rocks are the same size as the nurdles. So the ants will bring the nurdles to the ant bed. And so it's a safe, if you're looking along railroads, just look for the ant beds that are off of the railroads and you can find nurdles that way. They're kind of doing the work for you, you know. I wanted to go through real quickly just to kind of tell people, you know, people are probably wondering why is the trains losing nurdles? Well, whenever they fill, the train cars have 4 different silos typically, and then they gravity feed the nurdles into the rail cars. Each rail car has 2 openings on the end. Actually, there's 4 that go across the bottom. This image just has 2, but they normally have 4 that go across. But there's an opening on either side of the train where you see that cap right there. And whenever they take the nurdles out or they're putting them in, these nurdles, whenever they're going across to be loaded in or offloaded, there's a lot of friction that happens, and so it creates this energy, and it can melt the plastic slightly to be able to create these what they call angel hairs, streamers, and snake skins. Well, that can clog up some of the whenever they're actually trying to take out the nurdles from the rail car, it can clog up and leave some nurdles still in the silos. And so if the caps aren't put on correctly and the valves closed, nurdles can be leaked out after they think that the rail cars are empty. So that's the only reason why they would leave the caps open, is that they thought they were empty. The other thing is to be able to offload these nurdles, that they have to take the cap off on the other side of the train. And that's because of the vacuum effect. But from what I've been told from people that work on the railroads and offload these nurdles, lots of times they don't want to go on the other side of the rail car to be able to put the cap back on. And that's where whenever that rail car is going back to the manufacturer to be cleaned out and loaded back up again with another product, they can leak out because of those angel hairs that have collected nurdles up in there. It's not all the way empty. And so, you know, Operation Clean Sweep, anybody that knows about nurdles has probably been to that. This is the American Chemical Council came up with this program back in the early 90s to be able to prevent nurdles from getting out into the environment from facilities. But they have a number of different videos. This is just a quick snapshot of the correct way to be able to seal a gate up and make sure you close the caps and everything, so that no nurdles are lost on the way to the client and on the way back. But that's it for me. I appreciate it and looking forward to the presentations coming up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jace. And now I'll turn it over to Claire for her to share about her work.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. This is wonderful to be part of this presentation. Thank you, Fidra, for bringing us all together. So yes, just to Jace's amazing presentation. There might be some repetition on my side of things, but obviously covering the nurdle crisis from rail to reef here in California. Just see what. So, as we know, this is a global catastrophic issue that we have. From South Africa, when I first uncovered this back in 2019, we had 2 major spills, and those were from boats. And then that is when I understood and started being as a surfer. I was like, what are these tiny little balls all over our beaches when I got out the surf? I was like devastated when I did the research and then presented to the IMO, understanding that it's all about prevention in the end of the day, because once these are in the environment, we know it is so hard to actually clean them up. And to date, we have had the biggest spill which was in Sri Lanka, over 11,000 metric tons of nurdles in our ocean. I moved to Carlsbad 4 years ago, and once I was in actually San Francisco, still continued my nurdle research, working with Sea Hugger. And my son actually was on the way to go fishing in Agua Hedionda, and my kids have been drummed into knowing and identifying what nurdles are. I was like, as long as you weren't on the train track, son. But he uncovered these massive pockets of nurdles, just the other side of the actual sandbags that would capture them. So the work began, and I reached out to SD Coastkeeper, Surf, and then found Lawyers Coastal Law Group, and they took on the challenge. So there's been a lot of evidence collecting, about 496 surveys. I'll be down at the train tracks again, off the side, making sure we're not on the railway, but always to the side at 4 different locations along the California coastline, from Carlsbad and in Sneeders, and collected the evidence, which we're very grateful that the legal settlement has actually been taken. It's taken about 2.5 years, and they settled last week. So on ground zero, sort of in Encinitas on our 101, where our railway runs all the way along the coastline, I would collect the evidence by hand, as Jace said, like within a 10-minute sort of area, 3 by 3 feet or 1 meter area along the actual railway, and obviously documented this continuous accumulation. Some days 39, some days 52, and realizing that this wasn't an isolated spill. This was continuous and a chronic accumulation. Thanks to ChatGPT, if we put it in and we worked out the sort of railway length of around 128 miles, you're looking at about 16.2 million nurdles that have been released since I uncovered this 2.5, 3 years ago. So extremely worrying, because as you can see from the picture before, the railway runs along our rivers and lagoons, and then they fall straight into the ocean and, well, into the rivers and water bodies. So Jace did cover on this very well. So his diagrams, I think, were amazing. But again, from this, you can see that the pellets are escaping during loading, transport, unloading, and it's the pneumatic systems that create the plastic angel hair residue. So it's the force of which these nurdles are actually being pushed through. And this angel hair actually can also trap and stop the mechanism from actually being sealed. So then they can continue to be spilled also once they are being transported. So they're actually not being closed properly, which also results in these massive spills from when they're unloading, as well as when they think that they're actually closed. So these direct discharges are along the track beds. The superhighway to the sea. So this diagram sort of shows how, especially along bridges, there's that seepage of water, how it was designed, where you'll see the water actually, if it accumulates on either side, it would then go into these sort of, it flushes the debris and it's self-cleansing. So that will then in turn go into the wastewater and then reach our lagoons and rivers and so forth. So this is a critical sort of diagram just to show that, unfortunately, this is all, even if they're flying off at speed into lagoons and rivers, there's other ways that they can make their way through this sort of drainage system along the railway as well. So it flushes floating nurdles from the tracks through drainage and directly into coastal lagoons. So the pollution pathway, which Jamie also, sort of touched on, is factory unloading, the transport leak, the railway track drainage, which is engineered for water removal and flushing the debris. And then therefore it reaches our coastal lagoons and empties into our sensitive waters. shoreline deposits. I mean, there's thousands and thousands here along our coastline. I'm always picking them up. I've got thousands in my wetsuit when I come out. I cannot come out the ocean. So it's really sad because it's going to take, well, it's impossible to actually clean them all up once they're in the environment. The price of negligence, federal civil penalties. I mean, these are some of the prices for drainage violation, leaking bulk packaging, unloading safety as well, that there are through the 49 CFR in 2024. And accountability and enforcement. So it's voluntary commitments which have failed. You know, as Jay sort of spoke about there with Project Clean Sweep, it's not law. So we require independent verification enforcement, in my opinion. BNSF and NCTD, obviously, through the case that was settled, they've now confirmed that they will be doing mandatory inspection across 3 coastal locations. They will be checking like the slide gates, the hatch covers, making sure they're free from debris and the angel hair. There's implementation of a seal verification system, and they're also going to be putting slow zones in, as well as yard pellet capture mats. They've agreed on an SEP fund directed to education and continued prevention. But the biggest thing we still, I think all of us need to be pushing, which I uncovered back in 2019, is the classification of these nurdles to hazardous material. Oil is classified as hazardous material, and the IMDG code for nurdles is still not hazardous material. So until this is changed through the shipping and through the transportation of these nurdles globally, I do not feel that there is going to be a full, like, safe-proof solution. This needs to be done globally across the world. They are more hazardous, in my opinion, than oil. If oil is released into the environment, it is still natural that it soaks back into the earth crust, whereas nurdles, as we know, PFA is attached to them, they're plastic. So we all need to be working and pushing the IMO to amend this IMDG code globally so that we can actually put in the hazardous sort of criteria and protocols so that there are no excuses then or leakages going further from the whole transportation, from rail to ship, through the plastic manufacturers and so forth. This was my little innovation that I came up with in 2019. Again, it was just more of a tool to excite. I mean, schools, children absolutely love it, and we use it across the beach cleanups across South Africa and here in California. It's made from recycled PP, so we have to repelletize, but my foundation in South Africa picks up PP where we repelletize, and then the donation for the mermaid tear catchers go back to helping people collect more ocean-bound waste and keep it out of the environment. So it's got a dual functionality. It's like a sieving panning device, so it can be used in dry sand. I designed the holes and the dye to make sure that the nurdles would not fall through, so between 3 millimeters in size, because they can vary once they're in the environment. They can degrade from 5 millimeters to 3 millimeters. They're also different colors. And then this also can be used in water, because we have a lot of rivers here in California. We've been scooping up in the water a lot of the microplastics. So the styrofoam stays behind, and any other microplastics, including the nurdles. So it's a great way where we get this into the schools and we run mermaid tear competitions. The word mermaid tear, I didn't come up with that, but I thought it was a beautiful name that I found on the internet. Nurdles or plastic pellets are also called mermaid tears, hence the name mermaid tear catcher. This is a bigger Nurdle device from Nurdle UK. Josh actually created this. He does some incredible work in the UK, and he's got massive, bigger machines as well. So we took his blueprint and which he shared with us, and we created the Nurdle trommels in South Africa, and then we've got these in California as well, which can be sponsored by companies. So they're just a great talking point where we're doing our cleanups on the beach, where we focus specifically on nurdles, and we obviously pick up big buckets of sand, and it turns around in this big drum, and what is left is your nurdles and other microplastics. So some great, we give prizes away as well. So some great sort of activations and educations that we do. So yeah, just the reality is that a very scary thought across our miles per mile in Encinitas and our railways, around 57,000 nurdles have been flying off the trains, the flawed drainage, the unsealed transport. So law, is actionable, violations are in place, but ultimately, as I said, the solution is to support the policy change of the IMDG code, that each country gets behind this, and we really push for this to be done, which should have been done in the 1940s when plastic was invented. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. So again, I just want to both thank so much the speakers and our attendees for the time to look into this really important subject. And obviously, rail networks are a source of pellet pollution that needs more attention, more research. And I think my favorite part of working on pellet issues is it's one of the times you actually get to go outside, and too much environmental advocacy is done on a computer. So definitely please join in our global events for International Pellet Count or the Great Nurdle Hunt, and just continue engaging and getting out there. And also definitely look to Fidra's report on rail pollution as a brand new resource that will be really helpful in this space.